welcome to Mirror Neurons, Compassion Fatigue, and the Need for Adult SEL. My name is Kara Doherty, and I am excited to be here with you today talking about this. It is something that is so needed for our world and our profession. As we kind of go through this, there'll be different opportunities for us to interact. Please reach out if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any concerns. So as we're thinking about what it is that we're going to be talking about today, we're focusing on three main things. The first is mirror neurons. What exactly are they? What is the science behind empathy? The science behind why we get sucked into TikTok videos and we laugh at laughing babies, right? And from there, we're going to move into a conversation about compassion fatigue. Burnout and compassion fatigue, just fancy ways of saying we're tired. We are tired in a way that a nap is not going to fix. And finally, we're going to talk about the overall picture of adult SEL and the need really for that in our world and in our schools. One of the things that we get really caught up, right, is talking about SEL, social emotional learning. It's a big tagline. We have a lot of different places in which we talk about it. And oftentimes we hear things like, it's not one more thing on your plate. It is the plate, right? Raise your hand if you've heard that. I've heard that so many times. It's not one more thing. It is though, right? And in the process of telling us that it's not one more thing on your plate, it is the plate, right? We are then asking teachers and counselors and staff members to serve our students from a plate that they haven't eaten off of. When we neglect adult SEL and we don't focus in and provide supports for the continuum of people that are working and supporting, what we're doing is we're really ignoring and we're really leaving out one really important piece and really important part of this process. So that is our agenda for today. We're going to focus on those three main things. And like I said, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please reach out. So we're starting with mirror neurons, and we're going to have a science conversation with somebody who is not very sciencey. So obviously the best way to explain brain science is to go to the classics, which would be America's Funniest Home Videos. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, so it was a staple in my house growing up and watching. So here we go. I don't know about you guys, but I think I flinched as much as I laughed while watching that. How about you? Exactly, right? When we watch somebody getting hit, or we watch that snake jump out at somebody's face, they run into the wall, they fall in a swimming pool, every time we're flinching as we're watching it. And it's just something we do, right? So often in life, there are things that science can explain that we just experience all the time. So what is happening when we watch something on a video or we watch something happen in person and we respond as if it is happening to us, right? Those are mirror neurons. So our brains are really cool things. They're fabulous. They're fantastic. They're confusing and cool and neat and interesting all at the same time. And what we have in our brains are mirror neurons. And our mirror neurons are how we interpret the world around us. But what happens with them is they fire the same if I watch it as if I experience it myself. right? So we've got these mirror neurons in our brains that when we watch someone smile, we feel happy inside. When we watch someone get hit, we flinch. As if it is happening to us is how our brain interprets. So our brains, which are these brilliant, amazing, beautiful things, are also complicated, confusing, and confounding. And so we have these mirror neurons that respond to the outside world as if it is the inside world. And this is something that is evolutionary. This is something that has happened across the span of time. We've used it across the span of time. But what's really kind of interesting about this is in the early 2000s, around 2006-ish, they started really researching this, right? And so they've researched it in different things. They started out researching it in primates. They've done research on it in birds, right? They've done research on it in people. And so what we know from all that research is about 30% of the time, give or take, some goes as low as 10, some goes as high as 40, but about that percentage of the time, somewhere in there, give or take, about 30% of the time, when we see something with our eyeballs out in the world, we interpret it in our brain as if it happened to us. And there's a lot of different theories out there as to what this might mean and why this might happen, right? What's the function of this? If we think about what's the function, what's the purpose of mirror neurons, there's some different things that scientists and researchers have come up with that might be the reason why we have these mirror neurons in our brain, and this might be the way our brain works. So there's ideas like common coding theory. There's thoughts about this really being evolutionary and a pathway to knowledge acquisition. So if you think about it, right, how many times do we teach children things and say, learn from my mistakes, right? And we want kids to understand, don't touch a hot stove because you'll get burned, right? We don't want them to have to touch the hot stove and feel that burn. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, we can kind of look at this as to how the human species has evolved and has kind of come into, has not died out, right? I don't need to get bit by a saber-toothed tiger to know that that's gonna hurt a lot. I can see somebody else get bit and have that vicarious experience of that. And really, when we're thinking about this is the foundation of empathy. The mirror neurons in our brain, which allow us to see and interpret the world around us, to see things that are happening and interpret them and understand them deeply as if they are happening to us, is really this foundation and this building block of empathy. When we're thinking about this empathy and this experience of deep knowing, right? Empathy is different than sympathy. We know that, right? Sympathy is, I see something happen to you and I feel bad for you. That stinks to be you, right? That's sympathy. Sympathy is, I see it out there, it exists out there, and my understanding of it has a distance. Whereas empathy is my understanding of your experience as if it is my experience. And so what can sometimes happen, especially within helping professions, when we think about counseling and education and these different helping professions, what can happen in helping professions is we can say oh, well, we don't have, sometimes we get that feeling of maybe there's not boundaries there, or they just feel so much. They're sensitive, right? No, this isn't us being over-feeling. This isn't us not having boundaries. This is us having brains. That's how this happens, is that we have brains. Our brains have neurons, and those neurons work. And so when we see something, we experience it. So it can sometimes be when we have a young person in our life that's playing sports and we're in the stands and we're watching, and as they're going and doing their sports things, we're holding our breath and we're getting excited and we're feeling all of that inside. They lose and we're crying, right, as if it happened to us, and we're saying, this is ridiculous. It's youth sports. What am I doing? Right? But what we are doing is we are allowing our brains to work and to function. And so if we think about it, right? If we weren't online, if we were in person, sitting together at a table, having this conversation, and I had a cup of coffee in front of me, and I go to reach for my cup of coffee, you, sitting across from me, will have an experience in which you know if I'm picking up my cup of coffee to take a drink from it, or if I'm picking up my cup of coffee to clean up my table, right? When you sit with somebody at a table, your brain takes in all of this information, and then your brain interprets it as if it was you experiencing it, and therefore we get to quicker knowledge and deeper knowledge than what we would in other ways. And it's kind of this really interesting phenomenon that happens. And so often what happens with our brain is we experience things and we just know it, right? We just know the experience of empathy. We just know that on America's Funniest Home Videos, when somebody is doing something silly and they slip and fall and they get hit with a board or something ridiculous happens, we know that the whole audience takes that inhalation of breath as if it's happening to them, right? And they might cover themselves where that person gets hit as if they're going to be hit too. We know that. The entire franchise of America's Funniest Home Videos has marketed that and used that to hook us in on a Saturday night to have some laughs at home. And the thing is that there's a reason why that happens, and there is a function within our brain for that to happen. And when we think about what that means and why that matters, let's think about the world of education for a little bit. Let's think about some different things that happen within the world of education, that we have this knowledge of the mirror neurons in our brains and how they work. And we historically use that to teach. We've historically used mirror neurons, even before we knew what they were, to teach children skills such as empathy and understanding, such as putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, right? That whole idea of walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. We've used that for understanding. We've also learned it for knowledge acquisition. We've also used it as a teaching tool, right? Oftentimes teachers will say a lesson out loud, they'll give some instruction, and then they might demonstrate something, right? And we have demonstrations in lots of different ways. We have it in dance and in science class. We demonstrate things in math and in sports. And when we provide those demonstrations, what oftentimes happens is in the brain of our participants, they're going through the demonstration as if they're doing it. So if we think about I love dancing. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. And I think TikTok dances are hysterical, right? So I watch that. And a lot of us do. A lot of us, as you're scrolling through your phone, you might see a dance on TikTok or social media in some ways. And oftentimes what happens when we see those dances is in our minds, our body is thinking about how we would move to do the dance. So we're watching somebody else do the dance, but we're thinking about it in our legs and in our arms, and we're thinking about the music, and we're considering how we would do that. If you're somebody that's athletic, oftentimes you'll do that with sports as well. So when we think about how we've always used this, we have always used this as teachers and educators and counselors as a teaching tool. But what has happened in our recent world to shift our understanding of mirror neurons and how they're impacting us? Teaching, counseling, education is one of the professions that encounters burnout the most often. They've done national research on this, and one of the things that we know from that research is that people who work in education face burnout at the same rates as people who work in emergency rooms. The burnout rates for our profession are very, very, very high. equivalent to that, the top two professions for this experience is emergency rooms and education. So when we think about that, when we think about this experience of mirror neurons, one of the things that's important to know, I said, about 25-30% of people experience it when they see a stranger. So when I observe a stranger encountering a stressful event, so I see somebody I don't know experiencing stress, experiencing a hardship, about 26% of the time people will show elevated levels of cortisol in their brains just by observing stress in a stranger, right? So we take that information and then we look at the research that says that shoots up to 40% when we're observing someone we have a relationship with experience stress. So, complete stranger experiences stress 26% of the time. I'm going to have cortisol levels rising in my own brain. And when it is someone I have a relationship with, that increases by 40%. That's a lot, right? We think about education, we think about the world in which we're living, and for the past 3 years, the world of education has been rocked by stress. Our students, our families, our communities have experiencing record levels of stress, historic events that have caused pressure and concern for our community. So then what does this tell us? This information about the brain and how the brain works informs us that COVID was not the only thing that was contagious for the past 3 years. Our stress has been contagious. And the related burnout to that is at record highs. When we think about the profession of education and what we have witnessed in our students, we are having students that are experiencing mental health crises in front of our faces. We talk about trauma-informed classrooms and trauma-informed schools, and that is hugely, massively important, but it is also important for us to acknowledge that when we witness trauma outside of us, it impacts us as if the trauma is happening to us. It is not something that happens because of anything other than the fact that you have a brain and your brain works. You are not sensitive. You are not emotional. You do not lack boundaries. You have a brain and your brain works. And this is how the human brain works. The human brain works that when we see something, it is as if that thing is happening to us. One of the things that happens kind of interestingly in the world of counseling is that this is something that we've talked about in counseling supervision for years and years and years. And as school counselors, some of you beautiful school counselors have the unfortunate experience that you don't have a lot of chances for clinical supervision after you've completed your master's program. So typically for school counselors, after we finish our master's program, we don't have a lot of other opportunities for clinical supervision. But I do want to take just a brief moment to talk about something that happens in clinical supervision that can really be explained through mirror neurons, and that we can see parallels to within the world of education, within our work there. So interesting that I say parallels because it's actually called parallel process. So parallel process is this idea in clinical supervision that we act in supervision to our supervisors the way our clients act towards us. So if a client is avoidant towards us, then we are avoidant to our supervisor, right? So how this person acts towards us is how we act towards our supervisor. And conversely, how our supervisor treats us is how we will go and treat our client. So it's this act of parallel process where we repeat the patterns that we see around us. So this is something that we have talked for many years in clinical supervision about, right? This thing that happens. And if we think about schools, we can also see it emerge in schools, right? We can also see in schools how students act towards the teacher how the teacher then acts towards administration. How administration treats the teacher is how the teacher treats their students. It's this parallel process that we take on what it is that we see modeled in front of us. And because what happens is what it is that we see is what it is that we experience, which is then in turn what it is that we're going to act out, right? So think about this. If you come into my classroom every day and every day I smile at you, what's going to happen? You're going to start smiling back, right? And then what's your brain going to be saying? Your brain's going to be saying, smiling people are happy. Smiling people are happy. We are happy, right? And if you get a taxi or an Uber, right? Uber is now. If you get an Uber and you end up with an Uber driver that's real mad and is yelling at the cars around you as you're driving down the road, what's going to happen to your emotions in that car? Are you going to be feeling happy? Or are your emotions going to start rising up to have this deep experience of stress? So one of the things that happens because of mirror neurons in education, in counseling, in the world, is that we become what it is that we spend time in and we see. We talk about gratitude journals, in different circles, and this process of spending time every day acknowledging what it is that we're thankful for in the world, with the idea that what we put our eyes on is what we see. So we want to focus in on what is good, right? It's a little bit of that confirmation bias, and it's also a little bit of that concept that what we witness and what we experience become what it is that we internalize and become how it is that we behave. So there's a few different famous people that have said, show me a child's friends and I will show you that child's future, right? And that concept of we rise to the level of what it is around us. So if we are around people that are smiling, we smile. If we are around people that are angry and stressed and worn out, we become more angry and stressed and worn out. And so it's this concept of how it is that our brain works, that our brain tells us, sees things outside, and then tells us that that's what we are experiencing. And so that works out really well when we have somebody who smiles a lot, and we can go find our smiling friend and be like, look at this. You're smiling, I'm smiling, we're happy. We laugh all the time because that's what happens with yawns, right? If I yawn, you're going to yawn. But it also happens conversely. So when we think about education, when we think about this world of education, we're thinking about a world in which there has been a lot of stress. Our stress started with going home for just 2 weeks. We're going to go home for 2 weeks for COVID. And then that turned into the rest of the school year. And then that turned into distance learning and masking and record levels of stress for everyone within our profession and within our communities. When we're looking at this experience of the last 3 years, we're not only looking at the experience of the stress related to COVID, the stress related to masking, the stress related to the political landscape that has evolved over all this time and continues to evolve. So we're back now, right? We're back in schools, but what we're still experiencing is the impacts of that, and the impacts educationally of that, of students who are not where it is that they would be otherwise, and of students that are experiencing stress in record levels. So then what is happening to us as educational professionals? Burnout and compassion fatigue, right? The kind of tired that sleep won't fix. So if we think about teaching, we think about the world of education, right? We kind of have a different year than what the rest of the world has. Our year starts in September and ends in June, and then we have these couple months of interesting time. And so when we think about teachers in September versus teachers in June, right? I will tell you, for me, there is September Kara over here. There's June Kara, May Kara. June Kara gets excited again because she's going to have some time off. So, I've got September Kara and I've got May Kara. And those two Karas, they don't speak. I don't think they've ever even met each other. They don't know nothing about each other. September Kara is excited. September Kara has a new planner. September Kara is on fire. She is going to do some stuff. She's got a new bulletin board hanging up. September Kara is full of energy and light and excitement and motivation. That is September Kara. And May Kara is burnt out and tired. May Kara has been through the ringer. May Kara does not have a new bulletin board. No, sir. No, sir. She does not have a new bulletin board. May Kara does not, thank you, she does not have a planner anymore. That planner got lost back in January of some sort, right? That process of burnout for individuals in education is pretty common and pretty typical. It's normal. It's normal that we start out with a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of vigor and zest, and then by the end of the school year, we're a little burned out, we're a little tired. And so what can happen with burnout is then we have the summer. We have the summer to rest, we have the summer to relax, we have the summer to reconnect and come back to work. And so really, truly, across the span of educational time, this is something that we have done. This is a process that we have engaged in for a very, very long time. This process of burnout through that rises over the school year, that kind of accumulates in that May time. We then have our school year that ends. We have our summer to regroup and rest, and we come back ready for the new year, ready for more, ready for something different. This process of burnout is very appropriate and very typical, and it's kind of what happens, and that's okay. But what's interesting for us is that educators are experiencing record levels of stress. Educators, teachers, administrators, school counselors in 2 different national studies have report twice the amount of stress as any other working adult. They're more likely to suffer from burnout, from depression, than the general working population. In a recent survey, we're looking at job-related stress, and about 70+% of teachers report job-related stress, 85% of principals report that, and 35% of other professions. So we've got 35% up to 85% as that difference for the amount of stress loads that educators are currently carrying. It's huge. It is huge. And we're saying this in the context of a world that is stressed out, in the context of occupational and job research that shows that people are leaving their work at record numbers, right? We have this whole phenomenon of quiet quitting that is happening across our nation, globally even. In that context, education is still twice as stressed out as everyone else. That is not a small thing. It is important for us to understand. It is important for us to understand that we are in a unique place, that as deeply caring professionals, when we think about the world of education, people don't get into the world of education because they don't care. People get into the world of education because they care deeply. They care deeply about students. They care deeply about children in their lives. They care deeply about our world. Those are the kinds of people that get into school counseling. Those are the kinds of people that get into teaching, that get into education, right? So we have this deep place and population of people that care, people that care, people that have relationships we know have mirror neurons that fire more often. So we know that vicarious experience of stress is higher for people in these roles. And so what has happened as our world becomes more stressed, exponentially so too then do educators, do those who work in the world of education, school counselors, teachers, etc. So what does that mean, right? What does it mean that we are at record levels of stress? It means that there is something that happens to burnout when it is not addressed that translates burnout into compassion fatigue. So, if you think about this, many of us, we live in Pennsylvania, right? So speaking from the Pennsylvania standpoint, many of us have experienced a skunk spraying in the world around us. Maybe we're driving down the road and the skunk sprayed off in the field, or somebody's run it over before, or we're hiking or something like that. Not many of us have been sprayed by a skunk, but many of us have experienced smelling skunk spray in the air, right? Not many of us have been sprayed in the face by a skunk. And what I want to talk about, the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue, are the difference between smelling a skunk and being sprayed in the face by a skunk, right? Smelling a skunk is burnout. It's where it's not comfortable, it's not pleasant, we don't enjoy it. But with relatively simple steps, we can mitigate the impacts of that skunk spray. But when we are sprayed full on in the face by a skunk, our eyes water, our nose runs, we vomit, it's in our hair, it's on our clothes, it's coming out of our pores, we take a shower, it doesn't matter, you taste it in your mouth. It is an all-encompassing experience. That's compassion fatigue. Burnout is something everyone experiences, but if we get close enough, instead of burnout, we end up with compassion fatigue, and it is significantly more. It's significantly more for us. Burnout is when we're dissatisfied with work. Compassion fatigue is when that dissatisfaction with work translates into a world dissatisfaction. Burnout happens to us, we're at work, and we can start seeing it there. Compassion fatigue, we're going to see it in our whole lives. We feel under pressure with burnout. We feel out of control with compassion fatigue. Burnout, we have a lack of energy. Compassion fatigue, we're looking at PTSD symptoms. Compassion fatigue has also been called vicarious trauma, and it is truly when we have seen the trauma in the world around us, and because of the mirror neurons in our brains, and literally just how our brains work, we are then interpreting that trauma as it is happening to us, and we are stuck in that place, right? We all experience mirror neurons and that experience that can come internally, but sometimes we can get stuck there. When we have experienced burnout and we have not been supported in that, over the course of time, it can become compassion fatigue. When we are at particular risk for vicarious trauma, we can get in a place where we are experiencing compassion fatigue. Burnout is something that through self-care, through a summer off, through rest, through deep breaths, through drinking enough water, we can handle. Compassion fatigue is bigger. Compassion fatigue is bigger than us, and it is bigger than drinking a glass of water and taking a nap. I always suggest we should drink more water, and life would be better if we could nap more often. But so definitely do those things. But in the case of compassion fatigue, those are not enough to help us with what we are experiencing and to help us with what it is that we need to do for ourselves and for others that we work with. I think it's really important to kind of take apart this concept of self-care a little bit, because self-care is important for burnout prevention. It is, right? It's true. So self-care is something that we should be doing, but it tends to at times become like a tagline, like something that we say, right? Oh, self-care, right? And it happens a lot for people in helping professions. When we think about the helping professions, right, of counseling, of education, of some of these different places in which we all are, we have this experience of people saying things to us. And sometimes the things that are said to us are not quite as helpful as we would like them to be, right? So when somebody's going through a hard time, this happens for moms whose kids aren't sleeping, right? Or this happens for teachers with a rough class, or this happens for counselors that are dealing with some big issues with, currently we are right now in the U.S., across the nation, experiencing a mental health crisis where there are not enough mental health supports for the needs in which our children are experiencing, and school counselors are on the front line of that. But what happens, right? What is said to all these different people? What's said is, oh my gosh, that's so hard. What you are doing is so hard, and you are so brave to do it. You're a hero. Yes, what you're doing is hard. Absolutely, 100%. 100%. You are brave to do this work, to get up every day and to go to work and to do this. You are brave. And quite honestly, you are one of my heroes. However, there is nothing helpful about high-fiving somebody and saying, it's so hard. Yeah, I know it's so hard, so help me, right? Help me. Don't tell me, oh, being a mom's so hard. Oh my gosh, momming is so hard. You're so brave. You're a hero. No, stop. Help. That's what we need. We need to stop with this place of toxic positivity that we get into when we just say platitudes towards others, right? We have this place in which we see someone going through a hard time and we just say stuff to them. And we say these platitudes to them that sometimes don't quite, if you will, right? So we have things like my glass of water, right? This beautiful glass of water. And what do we say to people? And we say to people all the time, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to fill your cup because you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Well, here's the thing. You don't pour from a cup. You drink from a cup. You pour from a pitcher. You drink from a cup. And so when we're busy telling counselors and people in education, you can't pour from an empty cup, we're telling them the wrong thing. And we're encouraging them towards self-care in a way that is very dangerous. You drink from a cup, and you deserve a full cup so you can drink from it, so you can experience fullness in your life. You do not need to engage in self-care so that way you can do your job better. You don't. You need to engage in self-care for yourself, for you. Pour into your own cup and then experience drinking it. Just for you. Not to be a better counselor, not to be a better parent or worker or friend or spouse. No. You are not to engage in this process of self-care and burnout prevention for others. That's not why you should be doing it. You are just as deserving of all of the good things in the world as anyone else. You, exactly as you are, should drink from a full cup. Not so you can fill your cup and pour it out for others. Of course. Are you going to be a bucket filler? Yes. You got into this profession because you have a heart and a soul that cares about others. So will you go and fill buckets? Of course you will. Of course you will. But that's not where it needs to begin. We need to take a big step back and we need to start saying, how are we caring for ourselves? Not so we can go on and care for others, but because we are human beings who are just as worthy of all of the good in this world as anyone else. We say all the time, people before programs, you are a person. You are a person with a brain, and your brain has mirror neurons, which is causing you to be stressed when you're witnessing stress around you. But even in that, you are a human being, right? We live in this culture that's so focused on doing and so focused on what we have to give, to provide, to prove, that we sometimes forget that we can just be. We can just be. And we see it all the time in how we ask questions, right? We don't ask people, what do we ask? We ask people, how you doing, right? How you doing? How does that change when we start asking people, how are you feeling? Right? Not how you're doing. How are you feeling? And what changes when people start giving us honest answers? Self-care, this process of filling our own cup, is so important. And self-care, we can say all the taglines, self-care isn't selfish. That's true. It is not selfish to take care of ourselves. It's necessary and important and good. It is not something that needs to be large and extraordinary. When we think about self-care, we need to be thinking about things that we can do on good days and we can do on bad days. So some self-care might be drinking more water. Some self-care might be exercising. Some self-care might be getting a massage or walking our dog or anyone creating boundaries and structure for ourselves so we're not taking work home. So we're eating our lunch. Eating our lunch. Not working through our lunch, eating our lunch. Right? Those are all different things that might be self-care. And self-care is good for burnout prevention. Self-care is where we need to start when we're in that cycle of burnout, right? When we're in that cycle of burnout, for school counselors, I really encourage you to give some consideration to what it would look like to seek out clinical supervision. Mental health counselors, rehab counselors, they use supervision all the time as a place to really share what's going on within sessions with clients and move forward. And as school counselors, oftentimes we forget that that is a resource that we should be considering, whether or not it's professional clinical supervision or whether or not that's peer supervision with other individuals that we work with. When we think about our world, we need support. So burnout prevention is self-care. Self-care looks different for each one of us, but what we need to consider when we're thinking about self-care is something that we can do on good days and we can do on bad days. Self-care is something that follows us through, and self-care is how we say, it is okay for me to be. It is okay for me to drink from a full glass, and I do not have to drink from that full glass so that way I could be better for someone else. It is enough to be you. That's all. That's what we tell our students, isn't it? We don't tell our students they need to do all this stuff so that way they can be better at this or better for that person, right? That's not what we're saying. We're saying because you, exactly as you are, exactly as you are. The other thing for us to think about is, like I said before, burnout and compassion fatigue, although similar, are also different. When we have moved into that world of compassion fatigue, when we have moved into that world where we are experiencing vicarious trauma and we are having these symptoms, it is time for us to start considering treatment. It is time for us to think about our health as a universal concept. My health includes a lot of different things. My health includes my physical body, and it also includes my brain, right? So when we think about our health, and we think about what is it that we do for our health, we go to the doctors on a regular basis, right? Or at least we're supposed to. I just came back from an eye doctor appointment. We're supposed to have those. We go to the dentist. We should also be taking the time to check in on our mental health. If we're checking in on our physical health, we should be checking in on our mental health. And when we think about that, right, I don't go to the dentist so that way I can get toothpaste for other people. I go to the dentist to get dental care for myself, right? So in the same way, we need to check in on our mental health for us. There are benefits for others. It is nice for you can't tell because we're on a virtual meeting, but me having good oral hygiene is nice for the people around me so they don't smell my stinky breath, right? Me taking care of my mental health is similarly, it's the right thing to do for my mental health, but it's also lovely for those around me that I'm not leaking out my mental health everywhere, just like I'm not leaking out bad breath. But think about this, right? Our health is our health, and so we need to take care of it. We need to update it, and we need to care for the organs in our body. If I had an issue with my pancreas, I would go to the doctor and they would create a treatment plan, and I might get some insulin, and then I would use that insulin for me, right? Similarly, our brain is an organ and we need to take care of it. Mirror neurons is one of the ways our brain works. Our brain has cortisol and other chemicals in it, and we need to see to that. We need to take care of that. There's some different options available to us. I just want to toss off this information from the Pennsylvania State Education Association. We're all in different places, right? And so some of us have insurance through work, and through that insurance, we do have access to mental health treatment. Some of us through unions maybe have access to member benefits, which might include some teledoc and telehealth options for counseling and for mental health. Still other of us might have employee assistance programs. There's lots of different avenues to seek out and to start looking at where are the places in which we can do a mental health checkup, similarly to how we do a physical health checkup. And I really urge us, I know I'm preaching to the choir here who are firmly entrenched in this world of abolishing the stigma that comes attached to mental health treatment. But I just want to remind you that as much as it is important for those that we work with, it's also important for us. At the beginning, we kind of talked about that cliche, right? Social emotional learning is not one more thing on the plate, it is the plate. But then thinking about that, we need to remember we don't serve from plates we've never eaten from. If any of you have ever worked at a restaurant, right? When you work at a restaurant, you first get hired. One of the things that you do as a server is you try out some of the different food on the menu. You do. It's pretty routine thing to do as a server, so that way you know what it is that you're talking about, so that way you experience it, so that way you have a deeper, more well-rounded experience. And also, if you're working at a restaurant, that's awesome. You get to eat super yummy food, which is a great thing, right? So as individuals that work in schools, we do not serve from a plate we have never eaten from, which is why we need to experience trauma-informed care, why we need to experience adult SEL. Thinking about this, what have we talked about today? and where do we go from here, right? One of the things that I always think is really important, anytime we're in a conference or we're taking some time to learn something new, is to really think about where we go from here. Why did you just spend all this time on here with me? I appreciate the time that you were here with me. So I just want to take a minute and kind of go back over. So we talked about how our brain works, right? We talked about mirror neurons. We talked about how our brain doesn't understand the difference between what happens out there and what happens in here. So when we see something, it is as if it has happened to us about 20 to 30% of the time. That rises when we have a relationship with the person who's experiencing stress or trauma. So as teachers and as counselors, as educators, as people that work in this profession and profoundly care about children, that is going to increase for us as well. That is not anything other than brains and science and how brains work, right? So for that means that we are at heightened risk for burnout. We are at heightened risk for compassion fatigue, which means that we have a radical need for self-care. We are at a place unlike anywhere else where we have to say, what am I doing for me? How am I caring about myself in a deep and meaningful way? And so some of you have come to this talk because you needed to hear this. Some of you are here because you needed to hear that it's your brain. It's not you, it's your brain, right? You can't break up with your brain, so you have to learn how to live with them, okay? Which means that you need to fill your cup and you need to drink from that cup. You have a radical and complete need and right to self-care, to taking care of yourself. And for some of us, that is where we are, and that is where we end today. For others of us, we've already had this conversation. We're already at a place in which we've done that. We are filling our own cup and we are drinking from that full cup. If we are there, then the next step is starting to think about adult SEL and how we can start in schools sharing this information with others, so that way we as a school community of adults can be healthy, and from that place of health we can move forward with our next steps. We don't get healthy so that way we can be better at our jobs. We get healthy for ourselves, and then from a place of health we move on. And so oftentimes I really suggest this as a starting point in schools for some professional development for staff, really just starting out with what's the science? How does our brain work? Why does our brain work this way? And how is it that we as professionals in this world are encountering record experiences of burnout and compassion fatigue, and we're experiencing that? And just really that understanding, that place of starting some professional development with understanding of how this process works is really super important. The next place I always like to go is looking at toxic positivity, looking at that cycle that we get into with how you doing? I'm fine, everything's great, right? You know, we're gonna fake it till we make it. We're gonna smile our way through this. Well, some days I'm sad, some days I'm tired. Sometimes I'm fine, right? You know, how do we allow for a culture that really embraces realness and authenticity as opposed to this pressure to do more and be more? You know, that's oftentimes the next step of adult SEL that I would recommend, is really looking at how we address that. How do we address that elephant in the room of, you know, I'm so committed to my work. I work through lunch. I show up an hour before school and I stay an hour later, right? That's all great. And you can do that. But when it becomes a point of pride that we work through our lunches and we take work home and we work all weekend, when that becomes that sense of pride that gets in the way of us being healthy, that's no good. And we need to address that in clear ways, and we need to address that culturally. As a culture, how are we valuing appropriate boundaries, right? We can also talk about things for adult SEL as the stress cycle, right? So what happens with burnout is we experience a stress cycle, and that's hard. But what happens with compassion fatigue is we get stuck in that stress cycle in a way that's really unhealthy. So understanding the stress cycle and understanding how we can work through that stress cycle can be really helpful as well. I want to share with you my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me through the chat box. This is my email. I have a website. Please feel free to connect through Twitter, through LinkedIn, however kind of works best for you. I really am interested in continuing this conversation because I think it is so important. It's where we're at. It's where we're at in the world of education, and it is so important for us to remember that not only are we counselors, not only are we teachers, not only are we educators, but we are also deeply human. And as humans, we need to connect, and we need to start from that place of human beings and not human doings. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.